Defense News is proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, we'll learn about the military's effort to shore up holes in the U.S. missile defense system and get a look at the Army's new light tank in testing. We'll learn about a potential flaw in the design of the Navy's littoral combat ships and hear from a WWE superstar about how her Marine Corps service helped drive her to national fame. Plus, we take a look into 2021 and check out the biggest stories our reporters and editors will be tracking in the coming year. With the latest news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. We've got a lot in store for you in the first episode of 2021, so let's get started. With North Korea and other nations presenting a persistent ballistic missile threat to the U.S., the Defense Department is constantly looking for effective countermeasures. So what's on the table as nations develop missiles that come armed with decoys and other tech that makes them hard to hit? Daniel Woolfolk talked to Defense News' Jen Judson on how the military plans to guard against incoming missiles and the development of a mid-range interceptor.
Congress is directing the Pentagon to build an interim Homeland Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Defense Interceptor by 2026, a weapon that's not in the Missile Defense Agency's current plans to counter threats from North Korea and Iran. I recently spoke with Defense News ground combat reporter Jen Judson about the plan. Jen, welcome. Let's start. What is the current holes right now in missile defense in the homeland?
Well, I mean, right now we're mostly concerned about rogue threats, North Korea and Iran. And so we are designing our missile defense systems against those. So we obviously don't have fully capable interceptors that could go out against an interceptor that has decoys or countermeasures. And so we do need an interceptor that has a reliability to go after a ballistic missile of that with those qualities, with those capabilities. So a redesigned kill vehicle could do that, a next generation interceptor could do that. But in the meantime, we could also use the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System positioned in strategic places in the Pacific. We could use Aegis, and that's exactly what the Missile Defense Agency is proposing to do, is to fill in sort of an underlay that would bolster the GMD system that is in the homeland for homeland ballistic missile defense.
For having an interim interceptor, it would have to be developed in a few years, and then a replacement for that, just 2 years after that?
Yeah, so Congress actually wants to see an interim interceptor that made it into some language in the current National Defense Authorization Act. They're going to give Missile Defense Agency 30 days to come up with a plan to field an interim interceptor. However, the goal is to get the NGI fielded hopefully by 2028, if no later than 2030. The timeline, it's really, really vital that the Missile Defense Agency move quickly on this and not screw this up like RKV. I think Congress put this language in as a way to maybe promote that, because they also included a waiver in this language that would get the Missile Defense Agency out of having to do an interim interceptor. That would cost quite a bit of money and really only fill things in two years before the NGI. So they would have to show that it's not technically feasible. Just recently the RKV was shown to be not technically feasible. And also they would need to say that the capability isn't in national security interests. And if an interim system can't be fielded, at least 2 years before NGI can be fielded. So there is a way out the door here, and I do imagine the Missile Defense Agency will take that way out.
The Navy has had its own success recently where it shot down an intercontinental ballistic missile in outer space from a ship that was over by Hawaii. Does it have any impact in this kind of interim interceptor?
So not in an interim interceptor, but it does impact what the Missile Defense Agency is thinking about doing and designing an underlay capability to help bolster their ground-based mid-course defense system. So the idea is to use, THAAD systems and Aegis systems, but the test of the SM-3 Block 2A would be a part of that underlay. And the fact that it was successful will likely gear the Missile Defense Agency towards incorporating that capability into an underlay architecture for homeland missile defense.
The missile that was used in the Navy test was the SM-3 Block 2A. Can you tell us a little bit about that missile?
Yeah, that's an important missile. It's highly capable. It's next gen regional missile defense for Aegis systems. It did have some struggles in tests in the past, but it's had a successful test since then, and this was a very important test and that was successful. And because it was successful, the Missile Defense Agency will likely incorporate that into an underlay architecture if they were to go that route. So that could play a very important part in an underlay capability.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
And now for this week's headlines. The B-1B Lancer has successfully fired a stealthy cruise missile from an external pylon for the first time, adding another capability to its arsenal and potentially paving the way for the bomber to launch hypersonic missiles in the future. During a December demonstration in New Mexico, the B-1 launched an inert Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile, or JASSM, from the external pylon. The test proves the B-1B can be configured to carry weapons externally, opening the door for new weapon configurations for the aircraft, including the potential ability to launch hypersonic missiles when they become available. General Tim Ray, who leads Air Force Global Strike Command, said that arming a limited number of the bombers with weapons externally would provide more options for commanders while putting fewer aircraft and crew at risk. Prototypes competing to be the Army's new light tank for infantry are being tested by the All-Americans themselves. Soldiers of the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg are testing the vehicles and helping the Pentagon make a decision. The assessment of two different Mobile Protected Firepower, or MPF, prototypes for infantry will run between January and June. BAE Systems and General Dynamics Land Systems were chosen in December 2018 to each build 12 prototypes of the Army's future MPF vehicle. A winner is expected to be chosen near the end of fiscal year 2022. Also in land warfare news, Oshkosh Defense is hoping to up its artificial intelligence game with a recent acquisition. Oshkosh Defense, which makes the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle, or JLTV, announced it has agreed to buy engineering company Pratt Miller, which brings with it artificial intelligence, autonomy, and robotics expertise. Oshkosh said in a December news release that it has entered into a definitive agreement to acquire Pratt Miller in a cash-free, debt-free purchase price of $115 million. The Michigan-based Pratt Miller will keep its name, team, facilities, and branding, according to the announcement. The acquisition also could give Oshkosh more leverage in competitions like the GLTV recompete effort and the optionally manned fighting vehicle program to replace the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. And now to China. A paper published by the Chicago-based Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists has estimated that China has 350 nuclear warheads. That's significantly more than estimated by the US Defense Department. These weapons include hypersonic missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and their submarine-launched equivalents. The Pentagon estimated the number to be closer to 200 in its 2020 report on China's military. The think tank's report also said an estimated 272 of the 350 warheads in the People's Liberation Army are operational. This is your Defense News Minute. I'm Daniel Woolfolk.
Welcome back. In your military headlines this week, we start off in the Navy, where an entire class of warships is under investigation for a possible design flaw. Freedom-class littoral combat ships are now under the microscope after repeated failures on the propulsion chain of two of the ships raise questions about whether the issue is class-wide. Naval Sea Systems Command is now conducting a, quote, root system analysis on the problem, elongating the string of issues the LCS warships have suffered recently. There are 10 Freedom-class LCSs in service, with 7 more on the way. And female airmen are finally getting new body armor designed specifically for women. Security Forces personnel at F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming received some of the new armor in December, which features a curved chest plate and shorter torso length than standard gear. FE received 536 of the improved outer tactical vests to be worn by airmen in its 6 security forces squadrons, with more samples headed to 3 more bases in coming months. Final rollout is planned for the end of fiscal year 2022. And over in the Marines, for the first time in Corps history, women will be trained at its San Diego Recruit Depot. The Marines' West Coast hub traditionally has only trained enlisted men born west of the Mississippi River, while women have been sent to Parris Island, South Carolina. But that setup will change as the Corps takes steps toward more integrated training. The shift will take place over the coming 5 years. And in our other coverage this week, when LACEY Evans was a kid in a troubled home, she stumbled on one thing that helped turn her around: a stint in the Marine Corps. Now a WWE star wrestler, Evans talked about how the experience shaped her and gave advice to fellow Marines. Take a look.
I am WWE superstar LACEY Evans. I was a sergeant in E5 in the United States Marine Corps. My MOS was Military Police 5811, and SRT, my secondary MOS was SRT. And I served 5 years active duty, 3 in active reserve, and I was stationed at Parris Island, South Carolina. I joined the Marine Corps to get out of a rough situation, to learn a better way of life, because coming from a broken home, you really don't have many options. You know, you feel like what you're raised in and what was around you is pretty much what your future is going to be. And when there's the drug addiction and the depression, you feel like you are obligated to be there to support and physically lift up the ones that you love the most. So when I looked at the military, the branches across the board, as an option to not only get out of that situation, but to find the life that I was looking for as a young 19-year-old woman, as soon as I walked into the recruiting station, when I found out that the Marines are the most challenging, I was like, that's what I need in my life. Coming from a family that has lost everything, I lost my father, my siblings, everything was gone. My father took his last breath. He didn't show up to my Marine Corps graduation. He didn't even know that I'd become a WWE superstar. I lost everything, and I could not help them. And I wanted to give up, not on myself, but just give up the passion to tell people that you can make it. And then all of a sudden, WWE came to me, and they pretty much, this is what I heard: I want to give you a platform that you could show the world that it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, that you are capable of anything. Make a plan, you know, stay out of trouble, use the opportunities that you have within the Marine Corps to be successful. And I'm not talking about money. It may be successful to you, but that's fine, but like mental health and happiness, because when you're happy and when you're motivated and when you're passionate about something, the money will come, the house, the comfort will come. But get the degree. You know, use what the Marine Corps offers. If you're married, if you have little goals within inside yourself, use them. When I was active duty, I got a bachelor's degree. I started a company. I bought my first house. You know, I used the marriage counseling just to keep my marriage together. I didn't sit on my ass and wallow in my self-pity because of the things that I was dealing with and going through. I sat back and looked at my life and my opportunities as a United States Marine, and I said, look, I could do this Friday, this Saturday, Monday and Tuesday I'll be here, and then I'll go to this singles counseling session for my own brain so I can find that success within yourself. That's the message I would get. Don't just sit there and wallow in the barracks. Don't just sit there and wallow at your house and your falling apart marriage and your lack of a good parent. If you're any of those things, tell yourself that you are and use those opportunities to fix it till you get to that success of the happiness and being comfortable and successful.
When we come back, we'll hear the latest personal finance tips from Jeanette Mack and look ahead to the biggest stories of 2021. On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack gives her latest tips.
With 2021 right around the corner, now is the perfect time to start planning your investment strategy for the year ahead. It's important you know your numbers and your tolerance for risk. COVID-19 has impacted the economy and the market from top to bottom, so it's crucial you know what you and your family's budget can handle. If you can, you should always maximize your contribution to your TSP, 401k, or whatever retirement products you own. If you can't do that this year, do what you can so that you're still adding to your retirement income. Another important factor in investing is time. You're never too young or too old to start. It's simple. The more time you have to invest and earn compound interest, the more money you'll have when it's time to retire. There's no amount too small to start saving, and when it's time to start investing, you can do it with as little as $5. There are online tools and apps that make it easier than ever. So don't let anything hold you back. Remember, when you invest, you're investing in your future. So go ahead and make 2021 the start of something great.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next time. To get more of our daily coverage, be sure to visit our websites at Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps Times.com and DefenseNews.com. For our curated top stories in your inbox every day, subscribe to our Early Bird Brief. And to keep up to date with all of our coverage, be sure to visit our Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube pages. Also check out our live events and virtual conferences. Head to DefenseNews.com/events for more information. And when we come back, we'll get a look at the biggest stories our reporters and editors will be tracking in 2021. 2020 is finally in the history books, but that doesn't mean the news is going to slow down. Keeping our foot on the gas, we gathered Military Times' top editors and bureau chiefs to look ahead at the coming year for the stories they're keeping their eyes on. Take a look.
Welcome to the Military Times Reporters Roundtable, where each week we bring you the top news from the defense and veterans communities. I'm Leo Shane, Capitol Hill Bureau Chief for Military Times. Last episode, we talked about the biggest overlooked stories of 2020. It's a new week. I've got a new haircut. It's a new episode. So let's talk about what to expect in the new year. We're going to look at key headlines to expect in the coming months and why they matter to you. With me today are Andrew Tillman, our executive editor, Howard Altman, our managing editor, and Megan Myers, our Pentagon bureau chief. Thanks to all of you for taking a break from the news to talk about the news. Howard, let's start with you. We're going to have a new VA secretary and a new defense secretary in 2021. What do we know about them?
Well, these are both two very surprising and somewhat controversial choices by President-elect Joseph Biden. The VA Secretary nominee, Dennis McDonough, would, if confirmed, be one of only two VA secretaries not to have served in the military. He was an Obama chief of staff when Obama was in the White House. McDonough did have experience working with the VA on personnel and policy issues in the wake of the 2014 wait time scandal. So he does have some experience with the very sprawling bureaucracy of the Veterans Affairs Department. The other selection is the groundbreaking Lloyd Austin III, who is the nominee for Defense Secretary. Austin was a 1975 graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He earned the Silver Star in the 2003 Battle of Baghdad. He's been a groundbreaking military man. He's been the first African-American to be in a lot of leadership positions. In 2011, he led U.S. Forces Iraq in the withdrawal from Iraq. 2 years later, he took command of U.S. Central Command, becoming the first Black commander of that headquarters. It was during this time that ISIS had erupted, and he dealt with that. If confirmed by the Senate, he would become the first Black defense secretary. And there's a lot of interesting issues with him. I'm sure we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, well, McDonough, as you mentioned, is going to be the first non-veteran since David Shulkin. There's only been two. That's going to be a point of controversy in the confirmation hearings. Now, if Austin is confirmed, he's going to have to deal with the issue of sexual misconduct in the military. That was a big issue last year. Talk about what he's going to have to do in 2021 on that.
So the first test will be in his confirmation hearing. It's not unusual in a confirmation hearing for a senior military leader, Pentagon or otherwise, to get questions about this. But because of the Fort Hood report coming out so recently, talking about systemic sexual harassment and sexual assault issues at that installation, but the feedback has all been that this is Army-wide and also military-wide. He's going to have to sell the idea that he can take care of this as someone who was part of the rank and file when a lot of these problems were running rampant over the past few decades. So the issue always becomes every general goes to Congress and says, you know, the buck stops with me and we don't accept these behaviors in our formations. but it would probably behoove him to come up with some sort of task force or another, another concrete report, something that they can look at, and then take recommendations and maybe implement some policy force wide, rather than just saying, I'm going to take care of it, I'm in charge.
Let's shift our attention overseas now. Andrew, I know we've heard both Trump and Biden in recent months say that they want to get all the troops out of Afghanistan. They want to finally end that war. Is 2021 the year that we expect that's actually going to happen?
Yeah, I think that the incoming President Biden is going to face a lot of questions about troop levels overseas. President Trump has set in motion a drawdown in Afghanistan. He has talked about setting in motion a drawdown in Iraq. He has ordered troops out of Germany, and he's ordered troops out of Somalia. So these are really going to be front burner issues for President Biden and his incoming Secretary of Defense. And I think this is going to be a really contentious discussion. For a lot of military professionals, they've spent most of their career deploying to those locations, and they've really defined this current generation of military service members. And also on the political level in Washington, there's going to be a lot of debate on that, because on the one hand, a lot of people, a lot of the foreign policy professionals in Washington on Capitol Hill are really opposed to those drawdowns. But on the other hand, when we look at polls politically, they're very popular in the United States across the country. Most people think we shouldn't be there. So I think when those issues arise over the course of 2021, there's going to be a lot of contentious debate.
We've seen a lot of division in Congress already about just what those levels should be, how much information should the White House be giving. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens. What other overseas threats should we be looking at? What else is the military focused on right now?
Yeah, I think whenever you have a new incoming commander in chief, you would expect some of our adversaries to be, testing our resolve and kind of seeing what reaction they can expect out of the new leader. And I think that President Biden is going to have to deal with our two main adversaries, Russia and China. I think that, who knows where it could come from Russia. There's Russia is putting a lot of pressure up in the Baltics. There's been some conflict down in Ukraine. Russia has troops in Syria. So we could see really any number of hotspots flare up if Vladimir Putin sought to create some problems and test some boundaries. I think in China, obviously, we have the tension in the South China Sea and over Taiwan. I think a lot of the protests and the crackdown we saw in Hong Kong over the past year kind of show that China is really, stepping forward to assert its role as a regional power. And I think that there's going to be a lot of issues to arise in the Pacific, and that doesn't even get into the fact that we would probably see some testing from North Korea, and with their nuclear arsenal. President Trump had to deal with that from the get-go, and I would expect some early issues to arise there for President Biden. So I would suspect it could be a really eventful and potentially volatile first year for him.
And with each of those, there's questions about overseas basing and where military troops will be located. Howard, let me bring you back in to talk about Middle East and Africa. What are we seeing there, and how much do you think we'll be seeing U.S. military headlines from those areas?
Well, as much as this administration wanted to draw down, the previous Obama administration tried to get out of that region and pivot to the Pacific, and they wound up still enmeshed in Afghanistan and Iraq. I think you'll see a continued presence of the U.S. military in those regions. You have to remember that Iran still presents a threat, and the current administration is continuing to put pressure on Iran. You've seen recently several B-52 overflights of the region to send a message to Iran. You've seen the Nimitz carrier group in the Persian Gulf, again, to send a message to the Iranians. The silver lining in all this is that the Iranians would like to see the U.S. come back to the table in the nuclear arms agreement that was advocated by the Trump administration. Joe Biden has expressed interest in that, and I think that the Iranians equally want to see that happen, so they may tamp down their response. But it's a very volatile region. It really does remain to be seen, as much as the U.S. would like to, shift focus to particularly the Pacific to deal with the Chinese and what's going on in Europe.
Well, there's a lot on this list, and as Donald Rumsfeld said, that doesn't include the known unknowns that we'll have to cover. So be sure to stay tuned to militarytimes.com for the latest news, and thanks for watching.
All right, that's all we have time for this week. Join us next week to get your top news from the military and defense communities. And visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for even more coverage. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.